It was 10 p.m. on a Friday night. Ted and his friends were hanging out, just like they usually do. Except this time, the only difference was that they were home alone. And being the curious 15-year-olds they were, they thought it'd be fun to try a drink. After all, the parents weren't home to stop them. They all made the journey down to the parents' bar and discussed which drink to try. Eventually, they decided on White Claws, because they're only 5% alcoholic. Everyone was down, even Ted, for the most part. Ted hated those teenagers who would get drunk every weekend. He hated those kids who would act as if they were in college when, in reality, they had to go back to their parents' house at the end of the night. But he reassured himself, it's just a seltzer. It's the exact same thing as drinking sparkling water. So he took a can. And even though he didn't like the taste, he loved the experience, the thrill, the rush of adrenaline. It was the perfect combination for a kid like him, fitting in with his friends, growing up, while having only one White Claw. Because one White Claw barely makes a difference, his brother told him. When he went home, though, he promised himself he wouldn't do it again. At least not for a while. He had fun, but he didn't want to be that guy who drank every time he went out. Besides, he was only 15. He had his dough for the time being, and that was that. But a few months later, Ted found himself in the same situation. Except this time, the drink in question was beer. They were a little older, so that calls for a more advanced drink, right? At least that's what Ted's friends were saying. This time, though, Ted was hesitant. He didn't want to drink again until sometime later in life. Plus, this was an actual drink, a drink that people drink on TV. He couldn't pretend it was just sparkling water this time. But everyone was doing it. He quickly formed a pros and cons list in his mind, comparing the potential outcomes of each option. He heard his parents yelling at him when he got home, the door of his room slamming after fighting with them, his own self-degrading thoughts over having made a poor decision. He saw the view of the street from his bedroom window, the squirrel that his eyes followed as he waited for his punishment to be over. He felt the disappointment from his parents' eyes on his skin like lasers frying his insides, the remorse over shattering any amount of trust or respect they used to have for him. But above all that desperation and regret, he heard his best friend saying, "Come on, Ted, try some. You only live once, you know. Don't be well, you can fill in the blank there." His words rang through Ted's ears louder than any other piece of logic or reason he'd heard before. It only took 15 words from the person he looked up to the most to make him forget any bullet point that he'd written down on the cons list in his mind. So he grabbed a solo cup and filled it up. From that point on, by the time they were 16, Ted and his friends would drink almost every weekend. Whether it was White Claws, beer, or even vodka shots, they would never be at a party without a drink in hand. One night, though, Ted went home, sat down in his bed, and completely fell apart when he realized that he'd become the person he feared becoming. He became that guy who would rely on essentially illegal activities to have a good time, but more importantly, he lost his innocence, which is what he feared the most. Specifically, how it slipped right through his fingers without him even knowing. He thought he'd only have one White Claw, one beer. He never knew that a few poor decisions could lead to his worst nightmare. It's kind of like when your mom picked you up as a little kid for the last time. In that moment, neither of you knew that it would really be the last time she ever picked you up. Or how you never knew that the last time you played with your action figures would really be the last time. On that night, when he was only 15 years old, he never knew that that would be the last time he was a kid. The last time he was truly innocent. But what is innocence, anyway? How is it defined? Is it by the choices we make, how we act, the situations we're put in, our thoughts, values, fantasies? It's a concept with so much gray area. Where do we draw the line? Do we draw the line at our first middle school relationship, our first kiss, our first drink, or the first time we had sex? And when is sometime later in life? Next year? 2 years from now? 10? The concept of innocence is so subjective, right? It varies from person to person. The only problem is that it doesn't vary, though. We all say that we have a choice of what we want to do with our innocence, whether that means holding onto it or throwing it out the front door or something in between. But what we don't talk about is how normalized growing up really is, how normalized getting drunk at the age of 15 in your friend's basement really is. So yes, innocence is subjective, but somehow it means almost the same thing to everyone. Nothing. And that's okay. The interesting part about innocence is that you can choose what it means for yourself. Innocence is a choice, right? No one lifted the glass to your lips and forced you to drink. It was your choice to let go. But does that necessarily mean you're in control? For example, how can you control the foul words that your friends call you when you say no? How can you control the influence of your older brother who constantly tells you stories about the crazy things he did when he was your age? How can you control this normalized way of growing up so quickly where saying no is seen as boring and weak? How can you control the countless number of friends who each make up their own bullet point on the pros list in your mind? How can you control your own longing to fit in despite anything you may believe? How can you control the fact that saying yes is acceptable and saying no is not? The short answer is, you can't. The only thing you can control is what you choose for yourself. So when all the positives and negatives are laid out in front of you, what will you choose? But even then, how can you be confident in a decision when there's a million reasons why you should choose the other option? Is there a right answer? There has to be. The funny part about innocence is that once it's gone, it's never coming back. So there has to be a right answer. Or a lot of us are going to end up in situations like Ted, reminiscing about that day where we let go too soon, living in regret over having made the wrong decision, wondering, how did I get here? How did I let it come this far? If only he had made the right decision, maybe he would have had the chance to become the person he desired becoming. Correction, the person he used to be. Amidst all this uncertainty, the only thing that I truly understand is that innocence is what you make of it. It's up to you to stay or to go.